Good morning. Thanks for those kind introductions, Governor. And I want to thank the staff for the invitation to come speak to the South Dakota livestock producers. Before I begin my remarks, I need to probably discuss a little bit with you why I am so determined to get the playing field leveled in the livestock industry. And as I go through my written remarks, if you will keep this one fact in mind, and it is this, that we are the middleman. You produce, we process, and they buy. That's the consumer. We take what it is we sell to our customers, subtract what our credits are, add back what our expenses are, and bid you accordingly. We're the middleman. It's been that way since the barter system started thousands of years ago. We are a commodity. Now, as we go through this, and as I read the written remarks, think about what that is and how that works. And keep in mind that those who allege that there could be a monopoly or a price fix, how many of you have picked up a soft tomato? And what did you do with it? You put it down. How many of you would take home a rotten piece of meat? There's an old cliche in our industry that says you either sell it or you smell it. Point being, there is no time to fix any prices. If you take a pencil or this suit, it can hang on the rack forever till you get your price. You can't do that with meat, potatoes, or tomatoes. It won't work. You must sell it, and you lower your price till it clears the hurdle. Now, as I read forward, if you'll just keep that in the back of your mind, and then after we're done, I'll answer whatever time is left for questions. IBP has had a presence in this state for well over 30 years, providing a daily market for South Dakota livestock producers. Just last year alone, IBP purchased over $500 million worth of cattle and hogs from the local producers. Those of you who know me well understand fully that giving speeches is not my strongest skill and certainly not my forte. Before I left home, my staff warned me that some of what I say will not be received well. But I am here nonetheless. For I believe in saying it the way I see it, and I believe in saying it to you in person. Mainly, I am here because I care about what happens to the industry called beef. I believe we are approaching the point where we either turn the tide and reclaim the center of the plate, or we ride it down until we are cast upon the rocks like the lamb in veal. Our time is at hand. Many of you have had questions about IBP, some of which I will address later during the discussion period. But we have some questions of you and your industry, and that is where I would like to start. 2 years ago, last month, a lawsuit was filed against the United States Department of Agriculture to prevent the agency from from continuing its then recent initiated sampling program for E. coli 0157H7. Not only was the program undertaken outside normal rulemaking procedures and hence probably illegal, but it classified an extremely rare but natural occurring pathogen in beef simply as an adulterant. Define it as an adulterant in raw ground beef has made everyone in the cattle feeding, meat processing, and retail industries vulnerable to criminal prosecution. But worse than that, all of that, the program was a farce. It was an ill-conceived, unsound, illogical, and scientifically flawed waste of precious resources that could mislead consumers with empty promises of a safer food supply, which, as a result, may cause them to relax their own cooking and handling practices and expose them to greater risks. This lawsuit was filed on behalf of the American Meat Institute, the Food Marketing Institute, the National Growers Association, the Southwest Meat Association, the National American Wholesale Grocers Association, the International Food Service Distributors Association, the Texas Food Industry Association, and the Texas Retailing Association and Food Council. Conspicuous by their absence were the livestock associations, and particularly the National Cattlemen. I have only one question. Where were you? Where were you when the rest of us were fighting the battle alone? It is incomprehensible to me that you and your organization didn't start this effort, much less be a part of it. But more importantly, where are you in the efforts to deal with this and all the deadly pathogens on an ongoing basis? Do you know? You should. Listen to what I am saying. This invisible bacteria and another one called BSE has the potential to bring this industry to its knees. Another major breakout of this deadly disease will strain the trust that exists between our product and the consumer. And God help all of us if that trust ever breaks. Ask yourself, what will happen if the consumer won't buy ground beef because it is believed to be unsafe? And just to put it in perspective, the consumer eats 45% of all the cattle that come to market in the form of ground beef. For those of you who have trouble coming up with an answer, let me take you on a visit to the United Kingdom, where the demand for beef collapsed by 60% in the wake of the BSE scare and still hasn't recovered. They're burning cattle to take their lives. And then on to Japan, where the demand for your product, U.S. beef, virtually disappeared overnight as thousands became ill from the E. coli outbreak that wasn't even connected to the beef product. Of course, this isn't the first time the livestock associations have failed to answer the bell. Today, right now, inequities in the federal inspection system for red meat and poultry give the poultry industry, now listen to this, a $3 billion competitive advantage over red meat. Let me highlight a few of these inequities. Beef and pork carcasses are not allowed any water weight gain during the process. Poultry is allowed to soak up 8%, and you compete against that. Red meat regulations basically disallow the use of skin in any processing. Poultry skin can be used by processors in the natural fall portions without any special labeling. And if I might ad-lib there a little bit, how many necks have you seen in the marketplace lately? It goes through mechanically deboned. You know where the skin ends up? Chicken nuggets. When they mechanically debone the backs, what do you think they do with the skin? Chicken nuggets. And we compete against that. Red meat plants are required to trim all contaminated carcasses. Poultry is permitted to simply wash contaminated carcasses. The media has labeled these carcasses as fecal soup, and you compete against that. Now let me ad-lib here again. When we take a carcass down the line, we come to the final rail, we have to do all of the trimming. And to what extent we trim is to what extent we start marking a carcass somewhat less than perfect. And by the degree of which it has to be marked less than perfect is to what extent it's discounted in the marketplace. And I've been in more chicken plants than most chicken people. And I can tell you, not a chicken comes through the mechanically plucking process without some fecal on it. And they wash it off. Now, if they had to stop the chain and trim it like we do, rather than wash it, and if their chicken was scored as much as our meat is scored because of the knife cleaning or trimming process, I submit to you that their results, their ability to compete at the price that they can compete against your product would be significantly different. Until just recently, beef and pork mechanically separated from the bone had to be labeled mechanically separated beef and pork, making it an undesirable ingredient for the processors. Chicken and turkey mechanically separated from the bone could simply be called chicken and turkey. That meant that billions of pounds of mechanically separated poultry, which also includes some lungs, some sex glands, some internal parts, moved into an attractively priced market from which red meat was restricted, and you compete against that. This provision in the regulations was struck down in a court system as a result of a lawsuit by IBP and two other sausage makers. In the wake of the E. coli illness outbreak 3 years ago associated with uncooked hamburgers, the USDA on March 2nd, 1993, issued instructions to the field inspectors to enforce the zero-tolerance standard for fecal ingesta and milk contamination on beef carcasses and boneless beef. It was reported by the USDA officials that they were developing a zero-tolerance policy on poultry, which would be released shortly thereafter. Today, 1,284 days later, there is still no zero tolerance on poultry. And I'd like to ask just one question here. How many chickens are fed in South Dakota? Poultry is being allowed to operate by a different set of rules, and that difference has given the poultry industry a huge, unfair economic advantage over red meat. What is your greatest competition for the center of the plate, I ask? Poultry is. And for some time, they have done a better job of meeting consumer demand with a product that is more economically priced. It is time to seize the moment. It is time steps are taken to right the wrong. It is time to level the playing field. It is time to set forth a new course for the 21st century. It is time to replace politics with science. It is time to hold all proteins fish, chicken, turkey, beef, pork, lamb, and veal to a common benchmark for safety and wholesomeness. It is time that the cattle industry gets to play on a level playing field, and I repeat, it is time. I have only one question. Where are you? Why are the rest of us fighting your battle? How long will you allow the federal government to steal money out of your pockets? This is not new news. This is old news. Why haven't you and your associations changed the status quo? How many of you sitting in this audience have sent money and lent your support to the Wyeth-Willey lawsuit filed in Iowa on behalf of a handful of producers to level the playing field? That's a lawsuit that's been filed to try to force the government to make all inspections on an equal basis. These issues strike at the very heart of your industry, your well-being, its success, its longevity, its competitiveness. But where are your representatives in your organizations? Are they fighting the good fight? More importantly, are they winning the battles? A few years ago, the fast food industry dropped beef tallow as the preferred medium for cooking their French fries under attack by a gadfly. Where were you, your representatives, and your organizations then? Just recently, the chicken industry mounted a successful lobbying effort in the United States Congress, allowing chicken, which is shipped across the country, to be labeled fresh in the meat case. Where were you and where were your representatives? Now think of this. When we ship your pork or your beef from here to New York, it cannot go below 32 degrees, or it has to be labeled frozen. And when they take their chicken and freeze it, they can haul it from Arkansas to New York City, leave it sit frozen until they want to slack it out, and then call it fresh. We can't do that. So we sell it or we smell it. There is no real shelf life beyond the natural timing within the beef. Where are your representatives in your organizations? Are they at the forefront? Are they leading the charge? Are they marshaling the support? Are they spending the resources? Are they responding? Are they providing leadership? Ladies and gentlemen, the answer to those questions is a simple one. The answer is no. I know that's not popular, but that's a fact. You ought to ask yourself, is it fact? If it is, I say to you, then do something. Who is to blame? I blame you. You are the members. You are the boss at home, and you are at your association meetings. You send the dues. What do you get in return? I am asking you, as independent livestock producers and members of the livestock associations, to do something about the inspection system and the inequities. You pay the costs. You need to get your senators, your congressmen, your associations, everybody you can, trying to level the playing field. Think about this. Together, the combined pork and poultry industry has surpassed beef in its share of the consumer's meat dollar in the domestic market. In 1980, consumers spent 60% of their animal protein dollar on beef and 40% on pork and poultry. Today, it's 48% beef and 52% pork and poultry. The balance has shifted, and it is in a trend that shows no signs of slowing down. If that doesn't quite drive the point, let's try it this way. Since 1975, the U.S. per capita consumption of poultry has increased at a compounded annual rate of 3.4%. Beef has declined at a compounded annual rate of 1.3%. Over the same time period, the retail price per pound has increased at a compounded rate of only 2% for poultry, while beef has grown by 3.9%, almost double. Every day that passes marks another day that poultry relativity and attractiveness to the consumer increases versus beef. Yet, in the wake of a flat or declining demand for beef, what do the producers and their organizations spend their time on? Is it working on the real problems, lowering production costs, eliminating pathogens, reducing fat, ensuring uniformity, delivering consistent flavor and tenderness? Maybe. But they spent just as much or more time looking for a scapegoat. Whenever markets get thin or tough and live prices decline, their favorite scapegoat has been the packer, and especially IBP. In 1994, IBP was accused of gross manipulation of the live cattle market through the abuse of futures contracts made by a lawyer. This allegation, maliciously motivated, was nothing more than a patent, bold-faced lie. Nonetheless, it was picked up and repeated by many within the industry, aired throughout the media, and given credence by some of the livestock associations who called for an investigation. To protect IBP and its reputation, we responded. A response which required enormous amounts of time and resources from my people and the company to prove what we knew to be a frivolous accusation. We opened for public scrutiny our future trading records and invited all of your representatives to examine them, including a trip to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange to examine daily trading activity. After all of the exhaustive review, your representatives issued their final report. They concluded that not only was the volume and the pattern of IBP's trading substantially smaller than rumored, but that it had no significant impact on the market. Did we do anything wrong? No way. Will we continue to use the board to hedge our sales and our inventory position in the future? You bet. Just like most of you will. I have only one question. Did you hold all of my competitors to the same scrutiny? Did you examine their daily trading records and market position? And if not, why not? And what about your fellow feeders, who, by the way, collectively had by far the largest short position of all of us? What did you say to them? Lately, there seems to be a lot of fury and concern about IBP's formula arrangements with certain large cattle feeders. First, let me clue you in on something. There are a lot of other raw material commodities in the U.S. that trade on a contractual or formula basis in addition to spot bartering. Potatoes, petroleum, bananas, corn, and the list goes on and on and on. So don't feel special. Second, formula doesn't imply higher than real value in the marketplace. Third, packer-fed cattle. Now think of this. Packer-fed cattle, not formula cattle, which can be killed earlier or later, fill a particular time frame, be a day or a week, grant the packer far greater flexibility to move in and out of the marketplace. On the way down, he sells his cattle first. On the way up, he sells them last. I have only one question. Why doesn't this bother you and contract cattle do? The contract cattle we got is because you asked us to give you a price and to contract them. We did you a favor that you could do for yourself, but we stood the basis and you didn't. So why, when you ask us to contract your cattle, and we do, and we hedge them, and we don't lift the hedge except in the week they're delivered, I guarantee you, why do you get mad at us because we help you and other packers feed cattle and you're not mad at them? I don't understand. There's some logic about this that I don't understand. I guess I think you might find it hard to understand too. In 1989, I told your industry that if it allowed packers to feed their own cattle, IBP would do whatever was necessary to compete. Will we stop doing it? No. Will we feed cattle? Yes. If we feel a plant's raw material supply is in question or jeopardy. As most of you know, our recent purchase of Lakeside Industry in Canada includes a feed yard. I'm only trying to tell you one thing. IBP will do whatever is necessary to remain competitive. My board of directors and my stockholders expect no less, and they pay me to act, and I will act accordingly. And if the excuse isn't formula arrangements or future manipulation, then it's captive supplies. And right here, I just want to add a little bit. There's lots of talk about a co-op that's going to be in the northern states someplace. And by the way, whenever they get their money together, if they'd like to buy a plant, have them call me. I got one that I'll sell them pretty quick. They don't have to look around very far. Just have them call me. But I ask you, isn't it implied that all of their cattle, not part, but all of their cattle are going to be captive? Why then is it so bad? How does this work? Where is the logic? But we welcome them. We'll compete with anybody. But we fail to understand how that works. I hate to confuse the debate with facts, but let's examine 3 different points in time over the last cattle cycle. In 1990, according to the USDA statistics, captive supplies of cattle by the top 4 packers were at a 20%, and the annual average of West Kansas steer price was $78.89 per hundredweight. In 1992, captive supplies stood at 20.8%, and steer prices were down to 75.69. And in 1994, captive supplies were at 20.9%, and steer prices were down to 69. I have only one question. How do you explain a $9.34% drop per hundredweight in the live cattle process with the same percentage of cattle being captive supply? How are the effects of greater utilization of feedlot capacity, increased use of feed grains, and stronger demand for feeder cattle anything but good news for farmers, growers, and producers? How do you dismiss the brightest of industry analysts whose research show no negative impact on the price of a pen of cattle from competitive supplies to be small if they exist at all? And how do you reconcile the fact that significant portions of the captive supply are forward contract cattle that are put on at your request? Many in your industry, including most of the associations, wave the banner of value-based marketing as a means to stay competitive and compete and create a productive change. And I will be the first to say that as a concept, it is a great idea. But let me tell you how it is put into practice. Most, not all, but most of the feedlots in the U.S., especially those in western Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Texas, price their cattle by requiring the packer to bid one price on the entire show list. Offer to bid on a pen-by-pen basis, and they will laugh you off the property. Under that system, I submit to you that the good cattle didn't bring what they should have, and the poor ones brought way more than they ought to. Then to top it off, some of you want the paperwork back because you are interested in improving the cattle. But the next time around, you still sell them on the entire show list. I have only one question. How does that practice get better cattle to market? When does the platitudes and the rhetoric of change become a reality? What has to happen before we can bid on a pen-by-pen basis, or better said, when will value be judged by its merits? How many of you in this audience have larger operations today than you had 5 or 10 years ago? Please raise your hand. Thank you. How many of you will get bigger probably in the next 5 or 10 years? Please raise your hand. Do you know what they call that? They call that concentration. I'm not talking about me, but you, the producer. Our herd won't grow, but some of you will. Consider this. Let's look downstream in the value-added chain. Between 1990 and 1994, the number of U.S. grocery stores declined by almost 10%. Or, write this down, 14,000. At the same time, grocery store sales grew by 9%. Moreover, the share of grocery sales controlled by the largest supermarket has increased from 21% to 33% in just the last 5 years. Now let's look upstream in the value chain. Nationwide, there were more than 78,000 feedlots in 1980. Almost 3,000 head capacity of 1,000 head. Almost 3,000 of these feedlots had capacity of 1,000 head or more on feed. 75% of all the cattle were fed in the 3,000 lots. Today, based on 1994 statistics, there are only 44,000 feedlots. and only 1,800 feedlots with capacity of 1,000 head or more. Or they feed 88% of the cattle. Economists, sociologists, politicians, and maybe even someday anthropologists will debate and assign reasons for the concentration taking place on your side of the value chain. But all of you already know why you got bigger, because you had to in order to compete. This isn't about choice. It's about survival. So did the packing industry. You either go forward or you go backward. You can't stay steady or hold even. I only have one question. Why is it okay for 4% of the feeders to feed almost 90% of the cattle, and you cry foul about concentration in the packing industry? Why is it that every time cattle cycles get tough, for the last 100 years, when prices get thin and lower, you clamor for government intervention in the packing industry? Why is it that the results of every one of those studies, which never find anything wrong, are always ignored? The truth is a very rare commodity these days, and when someone has the guts to say it, it bears repeating. Let me quote from an article that crossed my desk just yesterday. And I quote, "Speaking at the Kansas Livestock Association convention last week, outgoing President Jim Meats defended the organization's approach to a recent question of packer concentration, captive supplies, and eroding equity within the industry. He said, your KLA executive committee decided rather than try to be popular, they owed it to the members to do something more important, to be truthful. The facts were and are that during every single cattle cycle in history, we have always searched for some outside scapegoat in order to explain our lack of profitability. Referring to emotional criticism that argued that packer concentration and captive supplies were a major reason for cattle market losses, Meats suggested that those considerations were overshadowed by large beef production and declining market share. Even though many contend cattle numbers were a problem, the point that was missed is that we don't sell numbers in the beef business, we sell pounds. So even with a drop from 130 million head in 1970 to just over 100 million in the 90s, our advancement in beef production per cow and heavier slaughter weights meant about the same amount of beef was on the market this year as during the previous all-time record highs. And the tonnage was competing with from 2 to 3 times as much lower priced pork and poultry as it did in the 1970s. End of quote. Frankly, we are confused. We don't know the answers to all of the questions. We don't understand why it is that it is business as usual. We don't understand why there are so few of us fighting the right to right the wrongs. We don't understand why we are at odds. We don't understand the reluctance to get involved and bring needed change. You in the industry are suffering from gridlock. In order to win, you've got to make an effort. You've got to take the first step. It is time to react. We are not here to give advice on the outcome. We are not here to offer recommendations or solutions. There is little, if any, time left for looking inward, for battles over turf, for endless debate, for dealing with personal agendas. It is time for your industry to look outward, to be one voice, strong and well-guided. Finish the debate. Ignore those who won't change and who don't want to compete. Implement the answers. Cut the fat out. Leverage your resources to help the cattle industry grow and make beef more competitive. Let me leave you with these thoughts. Our product, your animals, compete in a global protein market. Competition for the consumer's food dollar is intense, but all proteins compete on the basis of value. And that is where our focus has to be, all of us in this room. It's not about me, it's not about you, it's about all of us. Consider these facts. Beef consumption peaked 20 years ago. Fish, turkey, and chicken consumption have consistently grown over the same time period, both at retail and in food service. The relative retail price of beef versus chicken has increased by more than 300% since 1965. What that's saying is that the price of beef has grown faster than the price of chicken by 300%. The future success of the beef industry will depend on how competitive we are. The entire landscape of the market is in transition. We have to change. We must move forward. Beef is a unique product, but it must be competitive. Make no mistake about this. The average consumer standing at the meat case in their favorite supermarket, whether it is in New York City, Toronto, Canada, Seoul, Korea, or Japan, cares about one thing. Is your product tender, fresh, lean, and competitively priced? What they don't care about is where it came from. Whether it's the outback of Australia, the lush meadows of New Zealand, the plains of South Dakota, or the barley fields of Western Canada, or the grasslands of Argentina. Is it not? It is not a backyard game anymore. Today, genetics, feedstuffs, animals, and finished product routinely cross over entire nations and international borders. Along the way, they encounter GATT, NAFTA, the European Community, the Trade Country Meat Directive, foreign government subsidies, countervailing duties, quotas, tariffs, hormone bans, competing proteins from all over the world, and the list goes on and on. It's a high-stake game with the global players, and the house rules change nearly every day. IBP's roots lay in the imagination of its founders some 36 years ago. With the help of a $300,000 small business loan and all the equity we could beg or borrow, we opened the doors of a small slaughter plant in northwest Iowa to take on the giants of the industry, the Wilsons, the Swifts, the Cudahy's, the Armours, the Raths, the Morels. Several different times along the way, we almost went under. Today, we are a member of the global protein industry. We succeeded because we worked hard, 6 days a week, reinvested in our business, built and maintained state-of-the-art plants, focused on detail, and assembled a dedicated management team, and never, ever produced anything but the highest quality and most consistent finished product. And along the way, we breathed new life into an old line industry, provided daily market for hundreds of millions of livestock, added immeasurable value to countless bushels of corn and soybeans, provided safe, secure jobs for thousands of employees, and earned a good return for our shareholders. IBP did not start out to be the biggest. We started out to be the best, and I won't apologize for our success. In my 40 years in the meat industry, I am continually amazed by all of those who forget the one principle that will never desert them, the one dogma that always holds true, the constant beacon in every change, and that is the principle of supply and demand. The next time the markets get tough, live prices are under pressure, don't start looking for scapegoats. Look in the mirror. Is it not about fewer and bigger packers who have brought economies of size to their slice of the value chain? It is not about formula cattle and captive supplies. It is not about future positions. Maybe, just maybe, it's about feeders who overfed. Maybe it's about feeders who bunched marketings. Maybe it's about producers who continue to destroy the value by branding the hides. Maybe it's about producers utilizing the alphabet soup of genetics. Maybe, just maybe, it's about the extra 50 million pounds of beef that must clear the system each week against record supplies of competing proteins. If there is a lesson to be learned here today, it is just that: supply and demand. The economics of the market force will ultimately prevail. Nobody but nobody is big enough or mighty enough to control that. Remember, it is all about value, providing value to the consumer. There will be those who blindly, misguidedly, and reactively try to interfere, but fail to respond to the competitive marketplace and run the risk of being left behind. To protect the inefficient, perpetuate the high-cost producer, depend on him who won't reinvest in the business, and we won't need to come back anymore, because there will be only one request of all of them: will the last person please turn out the lights? It is your future. It is all of our livelihoods. But I promise you this: the days of tailgate thinking and locker plant economics are over forever. Thank you.